Welcome to the Bosman Viewing, and today we're going to talk about the story of every World Cup. The very first World Cup was held in 1930 and the competition was hosted by Uruguay. 13 nations took part in the tournament, 7 from South America, 4 from Europe and 2 from North America. The first goal in World Cup history was scored by Lucien Laurent of France, and the first ever final was contested between Uruguay and Argentina. The host nation defeated Argentina 4-2 in front of around 93,000 people to become the first country to win the World Cup. The 1934 World Cup was held in Italy and became the first tournament that required you to qualify in order to take part. 16 countries would qualify to play in the tournament, however reigning champions Uruguay boycotted the competition and did not take part due to a fallout from the previous World Cup over certain European countries' refusal to travel for the 1930 tournament. The 1934 World Cup was also marred by being a sporting event that was being used to promote fascism by Benito Mussolini, along with many accusations of corruption. Italy would go on to win the World Cup in 1934 by beating Czechoslovakia 2-1 in the final, with this side going down as one of the best in the country's history. It was decided by FIFA that the 1938 World Cup would again be hosted in Europe, this time by France. This caused outrage in both North and South America, where it was believed the tournament should alternate between continents. Due to this, all North and South American nations refused to take part except from Brazil and Cuba. Italy would again become world champions, beating Hungary 4-2 in the final to retain their title. This would be the last World Cup until 1950 due to the devastation caused by World War II. The 1950 World Cup would be hosted by Brazil, and it would see the return of previous champions Uruguay. This World Cup would also see the inclusion of British countries for the first time. However, prior to this World Cup, multiple different nations had to withdraw from the competition, mostly citing financial and travel difficulties around this time. That left the tournament with 13 nations competing against each other, and Uruguay would once again win the World Cup, defeating the host nation Brazil 2-1 in the final. The 5th edition of the World Cup was held in Switzerland in 1954. Scotland, Turkey and South Korea would make their World Cup debuts at this tournament, and the World Cup would be back to having 16 different qualified nations in the finals. The 1954 World Cup would be the first to be televised, and would also go on to set the record for the highest number of average goals per game. The tournament was won by West Germany, who defeated Hungary 3-2 in the final to win their first World Cup title. The 1958 World Cup took place in Sweden, and the nations competing would see the arrival of a young Brazilian superstar by the name of Pele. The 17-year-old was at the time the youngest player to ever play at a World Cup, and he would go on to score 6 goals in 4 games and be named the best young player of the tournament. Thanks to his efforts, Brazil would win their first World Cup title in 1958 by beating the host nation Sweden 5-2 in the final. The 1962 World Cup would be held in Chile, and it would become the first World Cup that used goal average as a way to separate teams that finished on the same amount of points. This tournament would also be marred by violence between players, including the first round match between Chile and Italy that would become known as the Battle of Santiago. Brazil would successfully defend their World Cup title in Chile by defeating Czechoslovakia 3-1 in the final. The 8th World Cup in 1966 was hosted by England, and it became the first World Cup to be held in an English-speaking country. There were a few issues leading up to this tournament, with all 15 African nations that were in the qualifying stage choosing to boycott the competition and pull out. This was due to FIFA changing the rules and no longer allowing direct qualification for an African team. Also prior to the 1966 World Cup, the World Cup trophy itself was stolen from an exhibition. A nationwide hunt began, and it was found 4 months before the opening game by a dog out on its walk with its owner. This tournament would also see the very first mascot, a lion called World Cup Willie. The host nation England would win their first World Cup title in 1966 by beating West Germany 4-2 in the final, becoming the 5th country to win the competition. The 1970 World Cup was held in Mexico, making it the first World Cup held outside of Europe and South America. El Salvador, Israel and Morocco were making their debuts in the tournament, and despite the high altitude and hot temperatures, this World Cup provided plenty of goals in attacking football. The 1970 World Cup would also see the first official World Cup ball to be supplied by Adidas, being named the Telstar. Brazil would go on to become champions again by beating Italy in the final 4-1. This win gave Brazil the third World Cup title, which allowed them to keep the Jules Rimet trophy, and a new one would be created for the next World Cup. This Brazil side has gone down in history as one of the greatest ever football teams. The World Cup in 1974 would be hosted by West Germany, and it would see the introduction of a brand new trophy that countries would compete for, created by Italian sculptor Silvio Gazzaniga. This tournament would also see a change to the playing format, with 2 rounds of group stages taking place. West Germany would end up winning their second World Cup on home soil, by defeating Holland 2-1 in the final. In 1978, Argentina would become host to the World Cup, with Iran and Tunisia making the World Cup debuts, but unfortunately the tournament would be marred by domestic politics and match-fixing allegations. This tournament would see another host nation win the World Cup, with Argentina becoming the eventual winners, beating Holland 3-1 in the final in extra time to win their first World Cup title. The 1982 World Cup was the 12th edition of the tournament, and it was held by Spain. The format would be expanded to this World Cup from 16 to 24 teams, allowing more countries to be involved. This would see multiple nations making the World Cup debut, with Algeria, Cameroon, Honduras, Kuwait and New Zealand all making their first appearances. This tournament featured the first ever penalty shootout at a World Cup in a semi-final between West Germany and France, and it also featured many violent fouls across multiple games, which in turn led to FIFA changing the World Cup regulations for refereeing decisions. Italy would win the 1982 World Cup by defeating West Germany 3-1 in the final. This was Italy's third World Cup title, and their goalkeeper and captain Dino Zoff set the record as the oldest player to ever win the World Cup at 40 years old. Mexico hosted the 1986 World Cup and became the first country to host the tournament more than once. Canada, Denmark and Iraq would make the World Cup debuts at this tournament, and it was widely reported that this World Cup saw the first appearance of the crowd favourite celebration, the Mexican Wave. Argentina would win their second World Cup by beating West Germany 3-2 in the final, and their captain Diego Maradona played a huge role in that success. He would score 5 goals and assist another 5 during the tournament, with his 2 goals against England in the quarter-final going down in history, one dubbed the Hand of God and the other the Goal of the Century. Italia 90 was the name given to the 1990 World Cup that was held in Italy. Costa Rica, Ireland and the UAE would make their first appearances at a World Cup, and this tournament would also provide one of the best remembered soundtracks of any World Cup, Nessun Dorma. Due to the low amount of goals being scored at Italia 90, that had an average of 2.2 goals per game, the back pass rule was introduced along with awarding 3 points for a win instead of 2 to encourage attacking play following on from this tournament. West Germany would win their third World Cup in 1990, beating Argentina 1-0 in the final, which was a rematch from the previous final 4 years earlier. This World Cup final would also see its first ever red card, with Argentina's Pedro Monzon being sent off in the 65th minute of the match. The 1994 World Cup was hosted in the United States and it was dubbed USA 94. Greece, Nigeria and Saudi Arabia would make their World Cup debuts, along with Russia appearing as a separate nation following the breakup of the Soviet Union, and a unified Germany taking part in the tournament. Despite football, or soccer's, relative lack of popularity in the host nation, USA 94 broke tournament attendance records with an average of over 68,000 fans per game. Football icon Diego Maradona would be surprisingly expelled from USA 94 after failing a drug test that uncovered a weight loss drug in his system. Tragedy also struck the World Cup as Colombian defender Andres Escobar scored an own goal against the United States that effectively eliminated his country from the tournament. This unfortunate event led to Escobar being shot and killed outside of a bar 10 days later. Brazil would be crowned World Cup winners for a record 4th time at USA 94, beating Italy in the final 3-2 in a penalty shootout. This was the first final to be decided on penalties, and it may be best remembered for the miss by Italy's Roberto Baggio. The 16th edition of the World Cup in 1998 was held in France, being known as France 98. Croatia, Jamaica, Japan and South Africa made their first World Cup appearances at the tournament, which would also see an expansion from 24 to 32 teams. New rule changes took place at France 98, with the introduction of golden goals, the banning of tackles from behind, and the allowance of 3 subs per game. The tournament was won by the host nation France, beating the defending champions Brazil 3-0 in the final to win their first World Cup title. The discussion around the France 98 final was dominated by the fact that Brazil's star striker Ronaldo was left out of the squad due to a health scare before being brought back into play. This led to speculation around what actually happened that day. The 2002 World Cup was hosted by both South Korea and Japan, where China, Ecuador, Senegal and Slovenia would make their World Cup debuts, and this was the first World Cup ever jointly hosted by more than one nation and the first to be held in Asia. Turkey would score the fastest goal in World Cup history in 2002 by scoring 10.8 seconds after kickoff in their match against South Korea. This tournament had many surprise results, with France and Argentina being knocked out in the group stage, and one of the host nations, South Korea, managing to reach the semi-finals. Brazil would become the eventual winners in 2002, defeating Germany 2-0 in the final to win a record 5th World Cup title. Brazil's captain Cafu would also set a record at the 2002 World Cup by becoming the first player to appear in 3 successive World Cup finals. Germany was the location for the 2006 World Cup, making it the 10th time the tournament was held in Europe. Angola, Ghana, the Ivory Coast, Trinidad and Tobago, Togo, and Serbia and Montenegro made their first World Cup appearances at the tournament. The World Cup final would be contested between Italy and France, that went to a penalty shootout following a 1-1 draw, that Italy would win 5-3. The final of this tournament, however, was clouded in controversy, as during a heated exchange of words between Zinedine Zidane and Marco Materazzi, Zidane headbutted Materazzi in an off-the-ball incident and was immediately sent off. This was Italy's 4th World Cup title in 2006, making them the 2nd most successful World Cup team ever. The 2010 World Cup was held in South Africa, making it the first World Cup to take place in Africa. Slovakia made their first World Cup appearance as an independent nation, and this tournament would also amplify awareness to the Vuvuzela. The Vuvuzela horns were used by fans throughout the 2010 World Cup, creating a unique and distinct sound. In the final, Spain would win their first World Cup title, beating Holland 1-0 after extra time to become the 8th nation to win the tournament. The 20th edition of the World Cup was hosted by Brazil in 2014, making it the 5th time it was held in South America. Bosnia and Herzegovina made their World Cup debut, and for the first time since the World Cup's creation in 1930, every World Cup winning nation qualified for the tournament. The 2014 World Cup would see the introduction of goal line technology for the first time, alongside vanishing spray for free kicks. A controversial moment took place in the tournament between Uruguay's Luis Suarez and Italy's Giorgio Chiellini, where Suarez would appear to bite the Italian defender, resulting in a 4-month ban. The host nation Brazil suffered their biggest defeat in football since 1920 after they lost 7-1 to the eventual champions Germany in the semi-final. Germany defeated Argentina 1-0 after extra time in the final to win their 4th World Cup title, equaling Italy as the 2nd most successful World Cup team. Germany's Miroslav Klose would also set the record as the highest goal scorer in World Cup history with 16 goals. The 2018 World Cup was held in Russia, making it the first time the tournament was held in Eastern Europe. Iceland and Panama would make their first World Cup appearances, and with an estimated cost of over $14 billion, it became the most expensive World Cup ever. The choice of Russia being the host for the 2018 World Cup was controversial due to the human rights issues in the country and alleged corruption. Video assistant referees were used for the first time at a World Cup in 2018, which played a part in only 4 players being sent off in the entire tournament. France would win their 2nd World Cup in 2018, beating Croatia 4-2 in the final. As for the 2022 World Cup being hosted by Qatar, there have been many issues and talking points around why it's being held there, and once the tournament is over, there should be plenty more to discuss around football and the World Cup itself. Thanks for watching, and as always, this is the Bosman Viewing. We hope you enjoyed the video, and if there's any other football topics you'd like covered, drop us a comment down below. If you did enjoy the video, if you could leave us a like, that'd be great. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you on the next one.